Fact checking in journalism has obviously been a hot topic lately, and it's become even more controversial now that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook appear to be taking a very different stance on the topic from their previous actions. If you're not aware of what I'm talking about, Mark Zuckerberg recently announced a change to Facebook's fact checking policy because, in his words, fact checkers make mistakes. Regardless of how you feel about the validity of automatic fact checking, I think it's important for us to establish a process that minimizes bias from fact checking and prioritizes the strengths of human reasoning over robotic processes. This process I'm about to explain may not truly make you an expert in any topic, but I think it can guarantee you that if you fully perform this process, you will end up more informed on most controversial topics than 99% of the everyday population. So, with that, I'm going to cover the Norris 8-step process for validating controversial topics, aka how to fact check the fact checkers. So, to briefly summarize the 8 steps before I get into the details, step 1 is receive information, step 2 is find the original source, step 3 is validate the source, step 4 is find opposing information, step 5 is find the source of opposing information, step 6 is counter validate, step 7 is draw conclusions that accurately represent both sides of the data. And then finally, step 8 is monitor for new information and repeat the process. So, step 1 is pretty self explanatory. You receive controversial information, and that starts the cycle. During step 2, it's your job to find out who actually first produced the evidence, arguments, or data being presented by whoever you received the information from. This is important because it's normal for people to accidentally or intentionally misrepresent information represented or presented to them. You might trust the person giving you the info, and that person might trust whoever they got their info from as well. But how do you know the source of all those cascading sources is actually reliable and actually tells the same story you've been told? The honest answer to that question is that we can't really know the truth unless we check for ourselves. So we're going to find out who produced the information so we can verify that it actually says what people claim that it does and that it comes to the same conclusions that they did as well based off of the information. And we also need to make sure that the source information is actually verifiable. Sometimes people will claim to have found a new scientific discovery, but then you'll click through several links and discover that nobody can actually provide a direct link to that study that's being mentioned, and which essentially means that people were spreading rumors or hearsay. That doesn't mean that their claims aren't true, but if they can't prove it, who cares? This is also why anonymous sources are so easily disregarded. Anybody can claim to be an inside leak for some evil corporation, but if they aren't willing to reveal their identity, unfortunately, it can be very hard to confirm if they're telling the truth. Moving on to step 3. Now that we've found the original source of a controversial claim, we need to see if there are other data sets or evidence we can use to verify the accuracy of that claim. Some of the ways you can do this include going to professional databases and scholarly sites such as Google Scholar, EBSCOhost, and other reputable institutions of research. You can often find polling data on political topics such as through sites like Statista, Pew Research, Gallup, Rasmussen, or USA Facts. Now, once you've done all that, you've got a pretty good idea as to whether or not your source has validity, so then you can move on to step 4, which is finding opposing information. This is the part that everybody hates to do because it tends to attack the assumptions you've probably already made at this point, and it can be very time intensive, but it is also absolutely essential to ensure we aren't forming an ignorant conclusion based on half the evidence available. To find information and opinions that oppose the positions you've already come across, you should seek out people, forums, social media groups, and professional organizations with known contrary opinions and ask for the evidence they have to support their conclusions. Nowadays, that's pretty easy to do because there are lots of online forums related to just about any hobby or topic. The really tricky part about this step is that you may not even know what keywords to search for in order to actually even begin fact checking yourself, especially if it's a fairly new topic. So ask your sources for popular terms used to describe their position. So now that you've collected a few claims or pieces of evidence that oppose the original argument you discovered, steps 5 and 6 basically follow the exact same process as step 2 and 3. You find the original source of the contradictory information, and then you perform the same validation process. Once you've done all that, you may not be an expert, but I guarantee you've put more effort into educating yourself than 99% of the general population will ever attempt to. So now it's time to move on to step 7, which is draw conclusions that accurately represent both sides of the data. The goal during this step is to assess the validated claims from both sides and attempt to form conclusions. You'll probably find that most issues have a reasonable middle ground. It's important to remember when you reach this step that you cannot simply ignore the validated information from one group in favor of another group. That just shows people that you're probably biased and hypocritical, and it will undermine your attempts to influence the conversation. Now, if you have trouble deciphering the truth because the sources you are validating have completely contradictory claims, the most likely true story is the one with the most logically compatible claims and evidence, and or the most reputable and thoroughly vetted data sets. And that leaves us with just one final step, which is to monitor for new information and repeat the process. It can be very exhausting, but so long as new information continues to be produced, it's our job to make sure that we take it into consideration and continue the fact checking process. At this point, a lot of you are probably thinking to yourself, who has time to perform these 8 steps for fact checking information? And that's a very fair question. And the obvious answer is that journalists are supposed to be performing this process, but it's also well understood at this point that we are living in the age of disinformation and manipulation. So we really can't trust journalists to accurately and fairly do their jobs. So if the professionals responsible for fact checking information can't be trusted, that means it's up to us individually to make sure that we're not being manipulated. Now, if you don't have the time to complete this process, and honestly, most of us don't, then it's probably best for us to focus on sharing information instead of asserting opinions and to step to the side on issues we can't validate so that the experts can take the lead on related decision making. It sucks and it's imperfect, but letting experts do their job is generally preferable to letting a novice attempt to try to take the lead.